And when I pulled the wheel hub off, the spindle looks pretty good. You know, there's not much wear on it, no wear on the diameters, but it looks like maybe it wore into the face a little bit. Seal area looks good, but the bearings, I don't know. If they've been repacked, it's been a long time ago. You can see how dark and dirty that grease is. And part of it might be the, you know, they used a black grease, but it just, to me, it looks dirty. So I'm gonna clean these up real good. Make sure my races aren't pitted or anything. As long as they're not pitted and they look good, I can clean them up, repack them, and put them back in. I'll probably go ahead and replace the seals on them, just so I got brand new seals in there. Again, if this thing's set for a long time, seals tend to get dried out and stuff. So I'm gonna tear it all apart, clean it up good, and we'll see what it looks like. But I'll go ahead and set up on the other side, and then I'll video tearing it down. So I'll be right back with you as soon as I get the camera set up. And then once you get the caliper off, since these aren't riveted on, should slide right off like that. It's about the only thing that's been easy on this car. Take it and pop the dust cover off. Okay, and you see it's got a big castle nut here with a cotter pin holding it on. Now this castle nut shouldn't be tight. You should be able to screw it off by hand, because you have to preload the bearing and then you back it off, so you have a little bit of clearance in there. You don't want it tight or you'll burn your bearings up and you end up losing a wheel going down the road. And this should just slide right off. And there's a washer. It goes against this outer bearing, and in your outer bearing, you can see the rollers look pretty good. They're nice and shiny, and I don't see any pits in them initially. Normally, a lot of times, they won't look too bad, but then your inner race here, let me wipe it out, will have some flaking in it almost, where it starts to, the surface starts to come off. So let me see what this one looks like. I don't know if you can see down in there, but it actually looks really good. So I'll get the outer seal knocked out here, and get everything cleaned up, and we'll see what we're going to have to replace on it. Okay, so next we're going to be packing the wheel bearings so we can put the wheel hubs back on the car. Got everything all cleaned up. These are the original bearings, or the, I don't know if they're original or not, but they're the bearings that were in the car. They're in really good shape. There's nothing wrong with them, not pitted or scarred or anything on the rollers. So I cleaned them up good with solvent, and now I got to repack them. Now they make a little tool you can buy. It's got like 2 flat washers with a stem. You set it on there, put the top flat washer on, tighten it down, and you pump grease through the center and it'll fill the bearing. They work really good, but you know, how often do you pack wheel bearings? I've always packed them manually, and I've never had any problems. So what I use is, I use this Multiplex Red #2. It's a premium grease. It's real sticky, so it'll stay with the bearing. It won't melt out real easy if it warms up a little bit. So it should keep the bearings nice and lubricated. So what you want to start with, I usually start from the back, and you just take a little daub on your finger, and then you put it in like that, and you just push it down. And what you want to try to do is, in between each one of those rollers, there's a little space, so you want to try to fill that space with grease. Just push it down in there like that, and just keep working your way around the bearing. And this is this happens to be a Timken bearing, which is the brand name of a bearing, but it's called a taper roller bearing, and they're used in, you know, things like wheel spindles, stuff like that, because you can adjust them, and they'll carry a side load plus a radial load. Now the older cars, like I had a 57, and it had like a ball bearing type arrangement in it, but it was kind of like a ball thrust bearing. You could actually pop the bearing apart if you weren't careful, because it was designed to have pressure applied to the out, you know, pushing out. But if you push it the other way, you could pop it apart. And I mean, that's what they used in the old cars, and I guess it worked. But they made upgrade kits for the 57s for people restoring them if you wanted to put Timken bearings in them. The problem with ball bearings, you have a very small contact point. You know, you think of a ball, there's one little tiny point on the very outside radius of that ball that's actually touching, really taking most of the load, where these it's spread across the whole roller. So this is really the way to go with wheel bearings, is a taper roller bearing. And after I get the one side done, I flip it over and do the other side. Just kind of force it down in there. And this stuff's really sticky. I mean, it's a really good grease for like wheel bearings and things. Hope I'm can't see my viewfinder, so I don't know if I'm in the picture or not. Okay, and then usually I'll take and try to spin the bearing, you know, kind of work that grease down in there. And then I'll go and put a nice layer around the outside of here, just so the outer cage is covered with some grease. So if it does need to, you know, if it warms up a little bit and gets a little thinner, it can kind of roll around and hit the rollers, keep them lubricated. But okay, and then I'll usually take, you don't need to fill the whole hub with grease, because like I said, the stuff's going to stick wherever you put it, and it's not going to get into the bearing. So I usually just put a nice layer on the race itself, just so you put the bearing in there, there's no doubt there's enough grease in there to make that thing work okay. And then on this back side, the seal has to go in it, so I'll usually put a little grease on that seal diameter, so when you press the seal in, that it goes in without any problem. Okay, so that's ready to go in. So I'm going to put that in like that. Now on the rear seal bearing, the seal, you got to press it in, and that keeps the bearing from falling out. The front bearing just loose in there, so once you pack it and put the seal on here, you can flip this over and do the other one, but you don't want to tip it back or your other bearing will fall out. So let's go ahead and press the seal in. And this is a seal number. It's an SKF seal. I got these from Napa, of course, along with my new brake calipers. So, and you always want to make sure you put these seals in right. The lip points one direction. And depending on the application, sometimes you want the lip to point out. So as you pump it, the grease will go out, but nothing can go back in, so you can flush the grease out of it, flush the old grease out. On this particular application, they had them in where the lip went in. So basically, as you pump grease in it, it'll push against that seal, make it seal tighter, and you won't lose all your grease out. And then the seal still keeps moisture out. So what I usually do is just put a little bit of grease on here. That green stuff on there is actually almost like a Loctite or something. It works to kind of help seal it on the outside when you press it in. I mean, you can take a punch and a hammer and tap these in, but sometimes they're so thin this way and so big, you start tapping, you can actually bend them a little bit. So anytime you can, you want to use a press to put these in. And let me move this over the press, and then I'll show you what I'm talking about. Okay, this is a little 40-ton hydraulic press I have here. So you got the seal resting here, and you can see how easy it slips around. So I got this little plate that I can lay on top of it. And then when you slide it under the ram, when you push down, it's pushing evenly all the way around that, so it'll go straight in. You don't have to worry about damaging it. So you just run it down with some pressure. You see it goes straight on in. And again, if you don't have a press, there's no problem driving them in. If you can get a plate big enough to set over the whole thing where you can hit right in the center of the plate, that's the best way to do it if you have to do it by hand. But if not, I have taken a you know, a round piece of aluminum and tapped on and kept working your way around till you get it started, and then you can go straight in. But you just have to be real careful because you can bend those really easy. It's really thin sheet metal. So I'm going to go ahead and pack the front bearing, and then I'll show putting it on the car and how you adjust it. Okay, so I got the wheel bearing all packed. I got the seal in back here. You put a little layer of grease on that lip too to kind of help lubricate it to start with. And then on the front, I got the bearing just kind of stuck in there. I got the spindle all cleaned up, so this is ready to go on. So be careful you don't damage that seal starting it up on that lip there in the back. It should just kind of pop right on. Okay, that's it. That's in place now. So I'm gonna be sure and put the retaining washer on. And it looks like they had it on this direction. And it really doesn't matter as long as it's flat. Sometimes they get a little deformed. You can flatten them out if they do and use them over again. And like I said, you should be able to screw this nut on by hand. When I took it off, it must have a little bit of grit or something in the threads because I had to use a wrench to get it off. But and it's a little tight going back on. Might be a little burr around the cotter pin holes, maybe when, you know, when they drilled them in there. Hopefully it spins free when we get it where it needs to go, because you really don't have to tighten these down with a wrench. I mean they aren't tight when you get done. You actually have to back muffle it and give some end play to those bearings so they don't overheat and burn up. So let's, okay, so what I usually do is just tighten down where it's kind of snug by hand, and you can feel there's resistance on this. And then I'll usually back it off. My hole's right here, so I'll probably go, and there's another one here. So what I'll probably do, so that's lining up with the hole right there, but that's not quite enough play. You should be able to just feel slight movement, just slight movement, you know, 5 or 10 thousandths back and forth this way when you have it set right. So I'm gonna go one more notch. That's a little bit too much, so I'm gonna go back forward. There's another hole here. Okay, that feels about right. So I've got 2 different holes here, so it kind of gives me a little more adjustment. But I don't know if you can hear it, listen. You can kind of hear it bouncing back and forth, and I probably got maybe less than 10 thousandths play there, so that should be fine. So you go ahead and put the pin back in it. And then what I'll usually do is I'll take a hammer to bend this up so it, careful not to damage your threads on the, you want it tight against there so it doesn't stick out and rub against your dust shield cap here. So, and then that goes back on like that. Those are just kind of a tap on fit normally. You don't want to beat too hard, you don't want to deform it. And you can actually take, you know, something like a screwdriver or something, hit on that flange if you have to. Normally they're not that tight going on and off. You can just kind of keep tapping them easy and get it all the way up where it belongs without too much problem. That should do it. And there you go. As good as new. So that's what you need to do if you have to either re-grease or change your front wheel bearings and seal. Normally you can use the bearings over again unless they ran dry, and you'll know it. You'll hear it growling going down the highway. Even at slower speeds you'll hear it growl. But even if you use the bearings over again, I recommend never using that seal over again. You always want to replace that because those seals get a little dried out and worn from age, and it just I don't remember what I paid for those seals. I didn't even look at the receipt when I ordered them, but it's worth the money to replace those. So okay, so that's how you do wheel hub bearings on a C3 Corvette.